Maths is a huge part of meteorology. And that, to be honest, was my biggest struggle trying to get into university because although I was reasonably good at maths, it never came easily. And my maths teacher was so patient with me and so helpful, and even continued to tutor me as I went into university, and the maths became incredibly complicated.
My guest this week is Zoë Johnson. Zoe has a bachelor's in meteorology and oceanography, as well as a master's in broadcast journalism, both of these from the University of East Anglia. She's also a former BBC Young Climate Change reporter, and currently she's a production journalist for ITV and the author of the Weather Almanac 2025 and the upcoming Weather Almanac 2026. Zoe, welcome to STEM with Mr. N.
Thank you very much for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you because I've wanted to speak to a meteorologist for a while. And what we're just going to start off with is that first degree that I mentioned you've got in meteorology and oceanography. Can you explain a wee bit about what meteorology and oceanography are?
Well, it's such a fascinating subject. Meteorology is basically the study of the weather and climate, whereas oceanography, that's a little bit more self-explanatory. That's the study of the oceans, and they're so very much interlinked that it was a really good thing to, study them at the same time because the oceans affect the weather and vice versa. So, yeah, really interesting degree and something I absolutely loved and kind of knew I wanted to do ever since the sort of science and geography lessons at school really inspired me.
You said there that the two are very interlinked with how the weather affects the ocean and vice versa. Do you have to study meteorology and oceanography together, or can you actually study them as two separate subjects at universities?
Yeah, 100%. And actually, the degree that I did, it doesn't exist anymore. So a lot of degrees nowadays, you kind of do tend to pick one or the other. But I do think, particularly with meteorology, there'll always be some sort of reference to the oceans in there because it's all part of one big climate system. Whereas I think oceanography, I might be wrong about this because I went down the meteorology route, but I think oceanography can be studied a bit more sort of separately and a bit more contained.
After studying meteorology and oceanography together, why did you decide to pursue the meteorology route as opposed to the oceanography side of things?
Well, I always knew I loved the weather. Um, that's why I chose that degree to start off with. I've just had a fascination with it. I think it stems from wanting to be outdoors as much as possible when I was younger, and then, sort of science and geography teachers in particular. And there's also a bit of maths involved as well, which I liked. But as I went through my degree, I chose and sort of experienced both meteorology and oceanography. I chose more and more sort of weather related modules during my degree, and found I enjoyed those a lot more. We did some really interesting things. We went on field courses and like measured the weather all week, tracked weather balloons going up into the atmosphere. And oceanography has some fascinating parts of it as well. But it just, yeah, it wasn't for me.
And I think that's actually quite important for people to take note of that even sometimes when you go and study something, there will be parts of it that just aren't for you, but it obviously doesn't stop you pursuing your own interests, which you then did and worked as a meteorologist. So, what does working as a meteorologist involve?
Oh, I absolutely loved it. I was an operational meteorologist for 3 years, for a private weather company called WeatherQuest, and they are unusual in the fact that their meteorologists get to do a bit of everything, which is just so much fun. As someone who worked there, you did all sorts. I mean, their customers include offshore wind farms, so you're speaking to people that manage wind farms every day, and telling them whether it's safe or not to go out to sea, which is a huge decision to make. And if there's thunderstorms in the area, you're talking about is it safe to go out? So, there was a lot on my shoulders back in those days. We'd also forecast for like big container ports. But then all day long we'd be picking up the phone to local farmers and talking to them down the phone about, what they can expect for the conditions they need to grow their crops and all those kind of things. So it was such a varied job and just so fascinating. I loved it.
And with that job with WeatherQuest, did you ever end up like on the television presenting the weather? Like most people are familiar with seeing the meteorologists obviously on the news presenting that. Was that ever part of that role, or was it more that sort of hands-on working with the people that the weather was going to affect?
It was a real mixture. While I was at WeatherQuest, I did a lot of radio interviews. All the local sort of BBC radio stations always wanted to talk about the weather, and that was really good fun. I did some of the bigger ones as well. And then during my time there, when I was working at WeatherQuest, we started this thing tailor-made for farmers called the Farming Forecast, which unfortunately no longer exists, but that's where I sort of got my first taste of presenting the weather on a green screen. And yeah, absolutely loved that. And it led me to applying for the BBC Young Climate Change Reporter position, which was several years ago now. It was when COP26 was held in Glasgow.
Why was it that you wanted to work for the BBC as that young climate change reporter? And what was that experience like?
Yeah, I've always been really passionate about the weather, and as I was going through my degree, it really opened my eyes to climate change, which was, growing up, not really something I'd learned about. Maybe we'd touched on it in geography, but, it wasn't a big part of my life. I didn't know that much about it. So when I learned about climate change, at one of the world leading universities for studying climate change, my eyes were really opened. And when that opportunity came along, I just wanted to share my passion for sort of climate change communication. And well, I live in East Anglia, and here in particular is a massive farming region. And I think a lot of people didn't realise how hard farmers were being hit by climate change, but also how much they were already doing themselves to try and mitigate effects. So that's kind of why I pursued that opportunity. But at the same time, I just knew I loved talking about the weather, and any sort of avenue where I could go to do more of that sounded great to me.
And it's really interesting when you're saying about that, going to one of the leading universities for learning about climate change. But a lot of obviously what you've been saying is how much you like the weather and meteorologists involved in the weather. And it's one of these misconceptions that I've come across with people when talking about climate change, and they say, but how can there be climate change? Because look, we've got snow and whatever. Can you explain a bit about what the difference is between weather and climate?
100%. So, weather is what we get day to day. One day it might be sunny, the next day it's raining. It's the sort of short-term changes in the conditions we see outside, whereas climate is something that happens over a much longer period of time. It's weather data averaged over months and months, if not years and years, and it's sort of more looking at trends. So, yes, we do get snowy winters still, and actually, as our climate changes, the atmosphere can hold a lot more moisture. And actually, if it's not that cold, sort of 0 degrees around that sort of margin, the atmosphere is holding a lot more water. We can actually still see really heavy snow events, even exacerbated by climate change. So we're under this sort of opinion that climate change means everything's going to get hotter all the time, which of course it does, but it can also have effects that we haven't so much considered, like really rainy conditions and stormy winters and things like that.
And it's great that you found that outlet for your passion through the meteorology work, then through the BBC. But then led you going from the young climate change reporter to going to get your master's degree in broadcast journalism and then working for ITV as a production journalist?
Yeah, it seems like a total switch, doesn't it? For someone who absolutely loved science and geography, it was such a scary step for me. But having enjoyed doing the weather forecasts on the radio and enjoyed my time at the BBC, I kind of wanted to pursue that avenue. And at the time, I really, my number one dream was to present the weather. So it was all about getting the experience of sort of weather and climate communication that led me to give everything up and go and do a degree in broadcast journalism. And it was actually fascinating because not many people go to those kind of degrees with a science background. I totally think that more people should because there aren't, a lot of science climate reporters out there. And it's fascinating to be able to use your knowledge of science and weather and climate, but be given these like communication skills to be able to put it into words, basically.
So, what does your role as a production journalist with ITV involve you doing?
Yeah, so it's a really, really interesting job. Similarly to working in weather forecasting, it has a lot of shifts and the content of what you're doing changes every day. So, the weather used to change every day would be different. And now the career I'm in at the moment, the news changes every day. So it really is interesting in the same perspective, and I'm working a lot of different shifts. But as a production journalist, my role is very much behind the scenes, producing evening news programs, producing content that goes like on the website and on social media, producing news bulletins, all sorts of things really. And my favorite days are those days where I could get to combine my knowledge from my past life with my journalism skills now. And when the weather is the top story, that's where I feel like I can really shine in this role in particular.
And it's great that the role still gives you that outlet from time to time to be able to have the weather or have climate in the highlight. But you've also now managed to find another outlet for your communication of the weather through these books, the Weather Almanac 2025, which has obviously been out this year, and the Weather Almanac 2026. What is in these books? What's the content like of them?
Absolutely. So the Weather Almanac is, I would describe it as a seasonal guide through the year. There's a massive misconception, and I totally understand this, that it is a forecast for the year ahead. I am not that good. I don't think anyone's that good. Um, it's more of a guide. There's a chapter for each month, and it's a guide of what you could expect at that time of year. So, in like November, December, we talk about fog and snow and things like that. And in the summer, we talk about heat waves, and just, the seasonal changes that happen as we go through the year, which are just incredible. We're so fortunate to live in the UK where we get to experience four really distinct and beautiful seasons. And I think this book has given me an outlet to share my love for that, really.
Yeah, and if you live in Scotland, you get to experience four seasons in one day usually. Um, it's how it tends to be up here. If you don't like the weather in Scotland, just wait 5 minutes and you'll have
I
something
love
different.
that saying.
So how did it come about then that you ended up the author of these books?
It was a real streak of fate, really. During my undergraduate degree, the meteorology degree, I did a year in industry, and part of that involved working at the Met Office. I did their summer placement. I'm not sure if it's still an opportunity they offer nowadays, but I did a summer placement on the weather desk, picking up phone calls to members of the public, which was always very interesting. And through that, I met another guy. He was doing a placement with the space weather team, which just sounds so awesome. And we stayed in touch, followed each other on social media, on LinkedIn, after the placement had ended. And he went on to author a book. Um, his name is Ryan French, and his book is The Sun, A Guide to Our Local Star. Really interesting book. Then, and he wrote that for HarperCollins, who are my publishers. Then, when they were looking for an author to help out with the Weather Almanac, Ryan put his hand up and says, I know someone who might be able to help with that. And that is really how it all happened, which, you can plan and plan for things sometimes, but occasionally, fate just takes hold, really, and something crazy happens like this.
Yeah, and sometimes it is just a case of who you know and being in the right place at the right time. That fate actually plays a hand in a lot of different things that
Yeah.
happen. And you'd mentioned there that the book is published by friends of this channel, HarperCollins. When will the Weather Almanac 2026 be available?
So it comes out in September this year.
Great. And what we'll do is I'll put a link to the Weather Almanac in the description of the video so people can access it. And also remember, if you watch this channel, you can get a 20% discount through HarperCollins with the code STEM with Mr. N. So Zoe, I'll make sure and direct people towards that book. And now I'm actually going to jump back a bit into your past and find out, you've mentioned and alluded to, a couple of subjects that interested you, but where did your interest in science and the weather all come from?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think a lot of the time when, we're growing up and we're in our careers, you look back on school and where did it all start? And I think I can pinpoint a couple of really good teachers, and I think that is the way for a lot of people who really inspired them. I always loved science growing up. It was just something that I was drawn to. But it was my maths and my geography teachers who really made an impact on me. And maths is a huge part of meteorology. And that, to be honest, was my biggest struggle trying to get into university because although I was reasonably good at maths, it never came easily. And my maths teacher was so patient with me and so helpful, and even continued to tutor me as I went into university, and the maths became incredibly complicated. So I don't know, I think the reason I fell in love with meteorology is just because it combined all of these subjects, a bit of science, a bit of geography, a bit of maths, all the things that I had enjoyed at school, and it was really the perfect thing for me.
And it's amazing that you had such a supportive teacher there as well, um, to help get you through the maths and then help you at university. But what's also great in that story is your dedication to wanting to achieve this goal of going to study meteorology and having to just really work hard at something that, as you said, didn't come easily to you. Were you at any point ever doubting that path that you wanted to pursue when you were finding some of these subjects difficult?
100%. Yeah, I think, the maths being a difficult thing, um, yeah, it felt like it was really challenging. I had one amazing teacher, but I did also have a teacher who was like, yeah, I don't think Zoe will be able to get into university because her maths is just not good enough. I think, I don't know if they do it anymore. I did an AS level in maths, so you did your sort of exams in the first year of A levels, and you kind of that was half of it, and you got a mark for that. And I did not do well. I think I got a U in that, and that's pretty gutting. And I had a year to really focus on my maths and turn it around to get into university. So I do think if you're not 100% great at a subject that you really like, you shouldn't let it hold you back because it certainly hasn't held me back. And when I got into university, there was definitely more mathsy options I could have taken. There was a lot of my friends went on to do an incredibly complicated module. I think it was called dynamic meteorology. And looking over their shoulders at some of the work they were doing, I was so glad I didn't do that. When I went into university, I played to my strengths and I only did as much maths as was necessary. And the funny thing is now, I barely use the maths I learned at university in obviously my day job as a journalist, but when I was a meteorologist as well. So yeah, never let these things hold you back.
And it's great that you didn't let it hold you back and went on to achieve what you wanted to achieve. And quite often we talk about barriers on this channel, and there's different barriers to different careers. And one for you there was obviously finding maths difficult. But in some STEM careers, like in engineering, for example, women are quite underrepresented. What's that like in terms of the environmental sciences, like meteorology and oceanography? What's the sort of gender split like there?
Yeah, 100%. I think at university there was a lot of balance, both in gender, ethnicity. But when I started in the field as an operational meteorologist that I noticed the diversity around me decrease a lot. I noticed, for a time I was the only woman in the company, and everyone around me kind of looked like me. There wasn't a great deal of like diverse role models, so I think it's so important that that changes now as we go into the future, and everyone feels that they could have a career in meteorology if they wanted to.
Why do you think that is from a quite balanced position at university that out in the field it is such a less diverse place?
Yeah, I mean it's something I've wondered for quite some time, and I do think it's getting better. There's certainly, diversity is definitely improving. I just think it is a bit of a niche career path, and maybe people don't know what's out there, what's available to them. Yeah, it's certainly an interesting career and definitely one for people to look into because it is becoming so much more accepting and inclusive.
And that's why it's great that you're also out here as a role model as well, so that young girls that are out there that might also have the same interests as you can actually see that you can do it and you can achieve and you can work in that field. And this is a good point to find out from you. What advice would you give to children and young people that are perhaps interested in STEM but aren't sure where they can go with it or what to do with their interests?
That's a great question. I think for me, just find what you love, find what makes you enthusiastic, find what you want to talk about all the time, and kind of follow that, And it's okay if you make mistakes. It's okay if you know, along the way you find things that you don't like so much. I actually think that's a really good thing. Finding out what you don't like is pretty much just as important, if not more important, than finding out what you like. So, yeah, enthusiasm and an open mind.